right, guys, week 5 is here, so we're going to do a rapid fire of the wide receiver, running back, and tight end positions and which 3 players from each position you need to start in week number 5. Robert Woods versus the Washington Commanders is a great matchup, and here's why. Washington allows the most points to opposing wide receivers in fantasy football, and on top of that, Woods is coming off back-to-back games where he's had 12 plus or more fantasy points in each of those outings. Woods in 2022 so far is 10th in target separation versus man coverage, and there's also reports that Treylon Burks is going to be out, so all that work in the passing game is going to go to Robert Woods. Next wide receiver is going to be any wide receiver on Cincinnati going up against the Baltimore Ravens, and here's why. So we know that Chase as well as Higgins are going to be locked into your lineups, but I want to talk about somebody else, and that's going to be Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd going up against the Ravens is really important because the Ravens have allowed the most receiving yards, the most targets, as well as being second for allowing the most touchdowns to opposing wide receivers. In Tyler Boyd's 3 of his last 4 games, he has had 5+ targets or more, and he's also averaged 14.1 points per game in those outings. On top of that, Boyd is 5th in fantasy points per target, and he's also 3rd in true catch rate. Now, the next wide receiver we're going to go through is going to be Garrett Wilson from the New York Jets going up against the Miami Dolphins. And the reason why I'm big on him is because Garrett Wilson currently right now is wide receiver 19 through 4 games. In each of his games this season, he's had 6 targets or more, making him a solid play in week number 5, and here's why. Despite having a down week, he saw 6 targets in that outing, and he also led the team in snaps with 77.1%. Now, on paper, Miami does have a solid secondary, but they are banged up and facing a lot of injuries, which is why I believe this is a plus matchup. And quite frankly, the main reason is because Miami is giving up big plays. So far in 2022, they are a bottom 5 defense when it comes to points allowed per play by averaging 6.7 yards per play. Now we're going to shift over to the running backs. I'm going to start off with James Robinson going up against the Houston Texans. We all know that James Robinson had a bad outing in week number 4, but it's because he played a tough matchup in Philadelphia. Now he's going up against the Houston Texans, and the Houston Texans are a terrible run defense. They've allowed the most fantasy points to opposing running backs, and I believe that with the fact that J-Rob has had over 60+ rushing yards in each of his games this season, as well as a touchdown, we know that the touchdowns are not sustainable. What we can notice is that he's outplayed Etienne, has also outsnapped him. So far in this season, James Robinson has outsnapped Travis Etienne 123-95, and he has also outtouched him 57-34. So we know that he's the one that's actually getting the favor to work in that backfield, and I believe that with the advantageous matchup that he has, he should be a strong start for you in week number 5. The next one we're going to go with is going to be the running back playing in week number 5 versus the Minnesota Vikings. And the reason I'm saying that is because we don't know if David Montgomery is going to be out or if he's going to play, but even if he's out, I'm still very confident in Khalil Herbert's ability. And I know that he's had a small sample size with 2 strong outings filling in for David Montgomery, but let's actually focus on the matchup versus the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings have allowed the 5th most fantasy points to running backs, so regardless who is there at the running back position, I would feel really confident with them, especially with this matchup. My 3rd and final running back that I would love to play in week number 5 is going to be Devin Singletary of the Buffalo Bills going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. After all the question marks of the different running backs within this backfield, we now know for a fact through 4 games that Devin Singletary is the main guy, and here's why. So far in 2022, he's actually separated himself from that backfield by playing 68.9% of the snaps. He's also had 51 touches versus 40 touches from both Zach Moss as well as James Cook. Also, in his last 2 games, he's had a heavy involvement in the passing game, which adds so much value for him, especially in PPR leagues. And lastly, the matchup versus the Pittsburgh Steelers is a good one. So far in 2022, Pittsburgh has allowed the 7th most points per game to opposing running backs in fantasy football. We're going to now wrap it up and go with tight ends that are must-starts in week number 5, and it all begins with Dallas Goedert out of the Philadelphia Eagles going up against the Arizona Cardinals. Dallas Goedert has been solid in 2022. In 3 of his 4 games this season, he's had over 60 receiving yards or more, and the matchup versus Arizona is a juicy one. Arizona is the 2nd worst defense when it comes to the following categories. They give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. They actually allow the most receiving yards as well as the most receptions. So you couple all this with the fact that Dallas Goedert is going into this matchup as tight end 9, he should be a solid tight end 1 option for you in week number 5. After having a huge outing in week number 4, I believe that TJ Hawkinson is slated to have another big one in week number 5. He's going up against the New England Patriots. New England is a bottom 5 defense when it comes to points allowed to opposing opposing tight ends. And I also believe that with the Lions being a top 7 passing offense, this makes TJ Hawkinson a strong start in week number 5. And lastly, we're going to conclude it with Tyler Conklin out of the New York Jets. I know that tight ends are hard to gauge and it's easy to go for the big name guys, but Tyler Conklin actually has a pretty good matchup here going up against the Miami Dolphins. Miami has allowed the 5th most receiving yards to opposing tight ends, and on top of that, Conklin has had 5 or more targets in every single game this season, making him a very solid tight end with a very high floor in fantasy football. All right, guys, if you got value out of this video, I would be really grateful if you hit that like button. Be sure to also subscribe. I'm also active on TikTok, and be sure to check out my Discord server for any more help that I can provide for you guys as we roll along in the season. Best of luck to you in week number 5, and as always, keep it 100.